listening to Battle Pages, Exploring War Through Literature. Episode 1, The Wars by Timothy Findlay, a deep dive into Canadian literature. In this podcast today, we each read off a summary of chapters 1 through 5. At the end of each chapter, we talk a little bit about our thoughts on what we've read. Some background information about the author. Timothy Findlay was born in Toronto to an upper-class family. He attended the St. Andrews College boarding school. He studied the arts of acting, dancing, and was actually an actor before he was a writer. Timothy actually came out as gay publicly in the 70s on a broadcast called The Shulman File. We actually have a clip here.
Mr. Findlay, are you a Canadian writer? No. I'm a Canadian who writes. But you are a homosexual writer. Oh, no, no. Again, I'm a homosexual who writes. Why are you asking these questions? I do hope you don't mind my asking about homosexuality. Did you ask, when you did your last interview with Margaret Atwood or with Alice Munro, if they were heterosexual? Well, people do want to know what makes other people tick. I don't tick, I talk.
He first came out as a teenager to his very conservative parents while it was still illegal, and they didn't support him. He actually married actress Janet Reid in 1959, and they soon divorced 3 months later. And eventually, he met a writer named Bill Whitehead, who he stayed partners with. Mental illness, gender, and sexuality were all common reoccurring themes in his work, like the protagonist Robert Ross in his book, The Wars. Now, please give your attention to Zoe as she gives some background information about the book.
The War's main hero, Robert Ross, is actually based on Timothy Findlay's uncle, Thomas Findlay, and the book is dedicated to his uncle. His uncle used to send letters home during the war, and that was where Timothy got most of his insight on the experience of war. The book The Wars was published in 1977 and won the Governor General's Award for English language fiction.
Here are our initial thoughts on the book.
Right. Well, I mean, my initial thoughts on the book at first, I didn't really like it that much because
Why not?
well, it's pretty similar to like most war books, I think, but you can't really avoid that because they're all talking about like the same wars. Like this one's World War II. Um, most books are like either World War I, World War II, or like sometimes the Vietnam one, I guess. But it has a lot of like similarities to other things. Like what are some other like
poetry?
yeah, a lot of war poetry about like how awful it is to fight and how like traumatic it is for everybody.
All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah, well, I never read that one, but
I didn't either. 1994.
yeah. But like that's not to say it's bad. It's just it didn't really do anything that I wasn't expecting, which kind of made the book a little bit less interesting to read. But it was like kind of very sad. There was that.
For me, initially, I also like wasn't too interested in it. Like it was just like, oh, here's another war book, blah blah blah. Until I really like got into it more, and you, Robert is just a very like interesting character in himself, you know.
Yeah, that is
And
one thing I liked. I thought Robert was a good character.
yeah, so I wasn't really hooked until we really got to know Robert as well.
What about you, Rowan?
Um, yeah, I mean, you guys are right, but like, I wasn't that like uninterested in the beginning because of the character Rowena. I was hooked onto her until she died, but then like the whorehouse brought me back in. So
That was an interesting part.
That was a good part because it also kind of goes into his own sexuality a bit because he feels very ashamed when he saw the two men in the
threatened.
brothel.
Yeah.
Yeah, he felt threatened, ashamed. He didn't know why. Like he had like
I kind of wish that the book explored like more about his sexuality. I think that would have been a really interesting plot. Like if they had talked about it more and like maybe
they do
I
it
guess
with
that he
Harris.
yeah,
a bit.
Yeah,
that's
you
true.
don't really know from Robert's perspective. You kind of learn that from Juliet that
Mhm.
he was in love with Paris.
Part 1 introduces Robert and World War II. Robert is a protagonist, Canadian soldier. The prologue, it just puts him into this kind of situation on like railroad track, kind of like in the future while he's in the middle of war, and you kind of get to see him as a person because he's letting these horses go. So he throughout the book there's a theme where he saves animals, and this is actually relevant in the author who is really into animal safety. Chapter 1 introduces Robert Ross, and I feel like that's a good explanation of him being introduced because it shows him he's kind of got this soft spot for animals. And it also explains his reasoning for enlisting in the army after his sister's death, who had a mental disability. All right, and so yeah, it just goes into why he joins the army, and his relationship with his mother is a little rocky as well as he leaves.
Mm-hmm. I thought that part was really interesting. Like when they're talking in the bathtub, there was one thing that she said I really liked. She says, "You think Rowena belonged to you. Well, I'm here to tell you, Robert, no one belongs to anyone. We're all cut off at birth with a knife to the mercy of strangers. We're that strangers. I know what you want to do. I know you're going to go away and become a soldier. Well, you can go to hell. I'm not responsible. I'm just another stranger. Birth I can give you, but life I cannot. I can't keep anyone alive, not anymore." Their relationship is really confusing to me. Like, she seems like she really cares about him, but I feel like she doesn't want to admit that to herself or to anyone else. She doesn't want to like get close to people. Uh so she kind of like is trying to be like, well, I'm just a stranger to you. Like we don't have connection or anything. But, clearly they do.
Actually, I kind of disagree. I think what she's doing, she might be trying to like distance herself from this
Yeah.
like such a big like burden kind of thing like on her conscience. Like she doesn't want to be close to Robert because she knows that he could die, and like war is like this, like all the casualties and stuff. She kind of wants to distance herself like away from that. That's kind of what I think.
Well, yeah,
Honestly, yeah, her daughter's death, it really took a toll on her, and now she's feeling this deep regret, kind of.
Yeah, like she does care about them, but like she doesn't want to get too close because she knows that like he could die, and just like how Rowena died.
Yeah.
And it's already been like hurt before.
So in part two, we kind of see Robert go to the training camp and see his experiences there, and where he meets like most of his fellow soldiers and like superiors and stuff. There's like themes of fear and uncertainty. We're
Well,
introduced to Taffler and Harris, which are really important characters to Robert. Robert also goes to a whorehouse with his fellow comrades, where we see themes of like his internal turmoil and with his sexuality when Taffler is seen with another man. Yeah, so what do we think about this chapter?
It definitely shows the author's kind of struggle as well, because he does often have themes of sexuality.
there or something.
So did you halfway through the recording, did you start ordering McDonald's?
You piece of I
What do
actually
you
don't
mean?
care.
It didn't
I'm
change
joking.
anything.
I don't actually care. It's just funny. It's fine. Anyways, I liked this chapter because I thought it was like it shows like parts. That's the thing I like about this book. Like it shows parts of the war that like other books were kind of like too scared to talk about at the
Yeah.
time. And it's kind of like it's not really like shocking to us now, but I can see how like at the time when this book came out, people were probably like, "Oh my god, it's talking about gay people. It's talking about like prostitutes and like all these bad things that happened during the war." Whereas now it's like, okay, well, it's not really shocking to us. We see this stuff in like all kinds of movies,
Yeah,
but
this book was banned
Yeah, I can see that. Props to like the writer, I guess, for doing things that were not allowed.
This chapter is just really important too for just like kind of introducing Robert, like going more into depth in Robert like as a character. Like the
Yeah.
first part I wasn't really interested, but when you kind of get to this part and you see more into like Robert's mind, like how he goes and runs by himself with like the
Yes,
coyote and stuff, I think that's like really important for like kind of showing the reader who Robert kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this chapter is
yeah.
one of the most important in my opinion.
It definitely is the most important for his character, like to see who he is.
Part 3, Robert is fully like deployed and he is on like a shipment boat with like other officers, and initially he is kind of just there. He is an officer, but he isn't really doing much on there, just kind of like getting to the destination. But after Harris falls ill and he has to take care of the horses like in his place. And in that time, there's a bad storm, and one of the horses breaks its leg. And Robert is the one that has to put it down because he is like the commanding officer of the horses. And he struggles very hard trying to kill this horse.
He's struggling with killing animals.
Yeah, he's very
Is-
attached to animals.
Again, he couldn't kill those rabbits in the first chapter. He couldn't kill the horse, and they show how if he can't kill these animals, how is he going to survive in a war where you have to kill living creatures?
Yeah. And eventually, after shooting it multiple times, he finally kills it. And when
Yeah.
they arrive in England, I believe, Harrison is put into a hospital and Robert is fully deployed. He is meant to lead as an officer a shipment with horses through this muddy trench.
Okay, in part 4 of the book, it starts off with Robert in the hospital bed, and while he's there, he's talking with a 12-year-old girl named Juliet, and they're forming a connection, and they're talking about just different things. And um, along with this, Juliet has a sister named Barbara who was interested in Robert. So then they had violence in the room, and Juliet saw them doing this. And this was an important part of the book because it shows a different side of Robert, a more aggressive side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a little bit later in the book, Juliet sees Taffler with blood on the walls. So then she calls for help and gets in the operation to save him from bleeding to death.
Well, yeah, so like basically she kind of saves his life because he's like committing suicide. Although he didn't want her to save his life. He wanted to die. But I don't know, she kind of has like a little bit of like a conflict if like she did the right thing or not, right?
That's
Cuz
big for a 12-year-old girl, not gonna lie.
yeah, she has to go through a lot of stuff.
That's an awful, what an
Yeah.
awful, whatever, week, month.
Yeah, that's rough. Zoe, didn't you say you didn't really like this part because Juliet was boring or something?
Yeah, I don't know. Just compared to like what had just happened, like all the intense stuff with Robert, this part was really boring to me with Juliet. I couldn't, it was kind of hard to care since it just like it was suddenly so slow.
I do think it's probably one of the less important chapters of the book because like
Is it slow though?
it's not really slow, it's more just like not a lot of stuff well, I don't know, like there's quite a few big things that happens, but it's just not really focused on Robert as much. It's more from Juliet's perspective. So the perspective shift is kind of a little bit jarring maybe to some
But
people.
isn't that like good? Like to have different perspectives?
I think it's
I
good, but
think
maybe it's because it was like not very consistent with it.
I don't know, I just found it less interesting than the other parts, that's all.
I
Mm-hmm.
think it was kind of. I was a little confused at the beginning of this chapter because it's like a different person, but it is from the perspective of her speaking, and she's one of the people who like remember him.
I think it does it does a good job at like showing that it's not all just fighting when you're in war. And if you get injured, then you spend time at these other kinds of places, and it's not just all terrible.
It also shows again more soldiers with their mental illness and killing themselves, because slowly a lot of the men kill themselves.
And it also shows like how the war affects different people. Like Juliet wasn't even fighting in the war or anything, but she still has to deal with all of the traumatic stuff that goes along with just living while the war is going on. He cares more about animals than he does humans at this point, because he kind of sees like the humans as like evil. That's how I perceive it anyways. Part 5, definitely the saddest part. It starts with him like going back to the war, and he goes in this bathhouse where he is assaulted. This is like a really traumatic part, very difficult for me to read. And after he's assaulted, he finds out that the people who assaulted him were actually his fellow soldiers, which is like kind of shows you can't really trust anybody, and his kind of loss of trust in more loss of his innocence. I kind of see this as like his breaking point almost, because then oh yeah, he burns this picture of Rowena, and then after that he goes back to the war, and he wants to let these horses go, but the commanding officer doesn't want him to. So then he's like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it anyways, because he kind of goes a little bit crazy. So then he takes all the horses, and then he shoots the commanding officer, and then he finds this train full of horses. And then those horses end up getting killed by the bombs. And then he finds a train full of more horses, and he takes those horses to this barn, and he kills another commanding officer. And then while he's in this barn, the barn catches on fire, and they're telling him to get out, and they don't understand that he can't get out. And by the time they finally are able to open the doors, basically all of the animals are dead, and he is on fire. But they are able to save him, and they bring him back to the hospital, and he's going to be charged for like crimes, and most of his family sees him as like a traitor. So what are you guys' thoughts on that one?
Oh,
Did we
you
talk
should
about how
also
he got
talk about
assaulted?
the nurse.
What happens with the nurse? Oh yeah. So the nurse offers like to kill him basically, because she sees that he's in so much pain, and he declines, saying that like it's like not his time yet basically. But he doesn't live for very long. I think he only lives till like the 26.
For this segment of the podcast, we will be breaking down different characters.
Character breakdown time.
I think that the burning of the picture, I think it said something about he didn't think the world deserved something as innocent as this.
Honestly,
Yeah, I
I
guess
thought it was like him letting go of that innocence fully. Like that's the end. That's his
Yeah.
breaking point.
yeah, like so much terrible stuff has happened to him. It's like,
I thought it came from a place of shame.
hmm,
Am I wrong?
shame about what?
Yeah, about what he's done.
Maybe. Yeah, because the bad stuff, I guess. Well, not really bad stuff, but he's probably killed a lot of people. Yeah. I think, like,
Oh fuck,
what?
guys, we completely forgot to talk about the trench, which is like the most important fucking thing in the book.
Was that in this chapter?
No.
Fuck me.
We did talk about it. We talked about the mud.
Like,
No,
you mean the
like
part
the
rag?
huh?
The part where he pisses on the rag?
And that.
Fuck sakes, do we need it though? Do we need the piss rag part?
Well, we
I feel like
need
it's
the part where he's in the trench with like Rodwell. Oh, good God.
we don't need to go over everything, guys.
Can you imagine if this was a real podcast? This would be so bad.
Yeah, dude. This podcast is already probably going to be 30 minutes, so I feel like it's fine.
And there's gonna be like 10,000 ums.
Yeah, dude. Erica, good editing, honestly.
Did we?
Who left?
Erica, I think your internet sucks. Oh my god! Yeah, so Rowena is kind of like a representation of
Innocence.
and it connects him to the animals too. Like he's so attached to animals because they remind him of Rowena. And even though she isn't like in the book a lot, she kind of has a big impact on like everything that happens.
Even in the end, they like close up with her.
Yeah, talking about her. Yeah, well, like his relationship with his mom is by that because he doesn't want to get too close to him because she's worried she'll lose him just like she lost Rowena, which eventually she actually does lose him.
She's kind of like Robert thought that his purpose was kind of to take care of her, and after she's gone, he doesn't really know anymore. So that's kind of what pushes him to enlist in the war, because he's like, well, I guess it's time now, you know.
Yeah. Her death kind of leads to all of these bad things happening in his life as well.
Who was your favorite
Yeah.
character? Mine was Rodwell.
My favorite character, I don't know. I don't really have a favorite character. I mean, Robert was probably the most compelling because
Yeah,
he's
I
the
like
main one.
Robert. I think he's a great main character.
What do you think, Erica?
Who is the one who had the little hedgehog? Is that Taffler?
Oh, he
That
was
was
silly.
Rodwell.
Rodwell. I liked his character because he and Robert both related in the innocence part of thing with little animals and keeping them.
Yeah, like when he's like the one who freaks out when all the books get messed up, right?
Yeah, that was part of him going slightly insane. I liked his character because of just, again, it was another theme with the innocence of animals and protecting them.
Doesn't he end up killing himself when he gets
Yeah,
That's why he was
he
like my favorite. Like he's complicated,
Mm-hmm.
especially because he had a daughter. Oh my god, that was sad.
Yeah.
and yeah, the only person he drew a picture of was Robert.
He said the picture was like a little bit weird, probably because he doesn't really draw humans very often. That was still like nice that he
Yeah, and
felt.
he gave a letter to Robert before he died to give to his daughter.
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah, and it definitely is part of the war theme.
Connection to the Arms of the Man. Captain Blunchley and Robert Ross are both shown to be characters that understand the negative aspects of war and have firsthand experiences with them. Because The Arms of the Man is a short story, they aren't able to go into as much detail about the horrors of war like a longer book like The Wars can. But Blunchley does speak a bit about how terrifying and difficult being on the battlefield really is. When The Arms of the Man was written, people often had a different like understanding of war and they romanticized it a lot and they didn't realize like how traumatizing it can be. The Wars expands on how this trauma shapes a person like Robert Ross's mental health and his gradual decline throughout the story, with it ultimately concluding with him having a mental breakdown and freeing all the animals. Both stories attempt to change the perspectives on war, but The Wars takes a much more brutal approach, going into detail with each terrible thing that happens, not only to Robert Ross, but his fellow soldiers and family members as well.
Our concluding thoughts on the book.
I like the,
I don't know if I
like, does
like.
that make it like a better book? Because I don't think it does, honestly.
I don't think. Here's the thing. You can include this part too in the podcast. I don't think it's necessary to go into so much detail. It does, like, if you're interested in like hearing about it, I understand why it's done. I just think that like The Arms of the Man accomplishes the same thing while still making the reader really uncomfortable.
The Arms of the Man hardly talks about war at all. It's more like the soldier.
My hero, like that.
But it
Yeah,
kind of
I don't agree with this at all.
You don't agree? You think that
No.
Armed Wars is a better book because it goes into more detail?
Yeah, because
I think and maybe The Arms of the Man isn't a good example, but if The Arms of the Man had just gone into a bit more detail, I just feel like I'm not really interested that much in war stories, but I understand why they exist because, you want people to know history so that they're not doomed to repeat it. I just kind of wish we didn't have to go through so many because you kind of get the idea and the gist of it after like one. But we've read so many over the years of just being
I
in
think
school.
it's just you can relate. You can like refer. Oh, that one also talks about war, but in a different manner. The Man was very romanticizing. Like, oh, look at this guy.
Captain Blunchley, not really.
But I honestly think it made it better. Like I was more interested in the Arms of Man than I ever was in the wars.
Yeah, me too, because it had other things that were happening and it wasn't so war focused, but it still kind of brought to your attention, hey, like war isn't as good as like the government makes you think it is, because the government wants you to like enlist, right? So that's why they romanticize it. But I just think that like I prefer a book that doesn't dwell on it as much. I think
Yeah, that's the dwelling. Like I feel like they're so like maybe too focused on detail.
yeah.
Almost, you know what I mean? Too focused on making it realistic.
Uh-huh.
There weren't that many super like action-full like moments though. Like there was the mud, him falling in the mud and
Yeah.
shooting the horse, and like the part with the German sniper. Those
Uh-huh.
are pretty much the only action-full moments that like significant. I don't think it dwells on it that much. Trivia. In the book, what was the type of gun that Robert Ross wrote home asking for?
The answer is Webley revolver.
Number 2. How do the soldiers avoid the chlorine gas?
The answer is Robert told them to urinate on cloths and put them over their faces.
Third question. What disability did Rowena have?
The answer is hydrocephalus, also known as water in the brain.
What animals did Rodwell have?
The answer
No,
is
shut up, it's my turn.
okay. I didn't know you wanted to do that one.
The answer is he had a bird, a rabbit, a hedgehog, and a toad.
Okay, guys, that was our podcast. Hope you enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye.
That concludes today's podcast. We hope you enjoyed our rants as much as we did. We highly recommend reading the words for yourself to get your own thoughts on it. If you would like to follow us on Audible or Spotify, you won't have any luck. This was Battle Pages, exploring war through literature.